Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
Phelps with 10 meters left.
3 minutes too good. The crowd roaring. Freeman wins gold.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome to episode 354 of the Physical Performance Show, proudly brought to you by Polar and Pogo Physio, and this is our annual Top 10 Countdown. I'm Brad Beer, sports and exercise physiotherapist by trade and training, and founder of Pogo Physio. Each week we'll bring you the latest and greatest information and inspiration designed to help you perform at your physical best. Of course, we do this across a range of our different episodes: interest editions, coaches' corners, learning sketch episodes, featured performers, and expert editions. And this episode is always so much fun to wrap up each and every calendar year since we started way back in 2015. Now, a big shout out to Polar, who have so generously offered up an amazing Polar Ignite 3 fitness and wellness watch worth 499 Australian dollars to one lucky listener of the show today. Now, to be in the draw to win the stunning Polar Ignite 3 fitness and wellness watch, you need to do three things. One, simply sign up to Polar's newsletter and you'll get the latest training insights and access to special deals by jumping over to the show notes at Physical Performance Show for this episode, or simply click on the text from whatever podcast player you are enjoying this episode from. And in addition to signing up for Polar's newsletter, be sure to be following the Physical Performance Show over on social at Physical Performance Show, and also Polar Australia at Polar AUS. So don't miss it. Jump in the draw to win the stunning Polar Ignite 3 Fitness and Wellness Watch. This will be drawn on New Year's Eve 2022. So get your entry in and you might be starting the new calendar year 2023 with a stunning watch on your wrist. And a huge thank you at the top of this show, our annual countdown of our top 10 most downloaded episodes, to you, the Physical Performance Show follower. It's been a big year. We've had another 1 million plus downloads across this 52-week cycle to take the total of the show's overall downloads to more than 4 million. In addition, we were thrilled to pick up third place, a bronze medal if you like, at the Australian Podcast Awards in the sports category. Our YouTube channel has grown, as has our social media following, so for that we are incredibly thankful and proud. Now, kicking off our top 10 episodes for 2022, in 10th place, we have episode 318 with our much-loved exercise physiologist, researcher and applied scientist, Dr. Dan Plews. Now, on episode 318, Dr. Plews stopped past the Physical Performance Show headquarters to take us deep into the world of heart rate variability guided endurance training. Dan is an absolute expert on this topic, having completed his PhD in 2013 on heart rate variability. And here's Dr. Dan Plews discussing why monitoring training with heart rate variability can be so useful and the benefits of this information in guiding endurance training.
And there was a paper that was just published by Kivanimi, who looked at one of the first papers that did heart rate variability guided training, which was using heart rate variability to decide what training you would do on that day, if it was high intensity training or low intensity training. And it was very interesting. And the results were quite positive, and that's kind of what got me into this area. So it was like, come over to New Zealand. Let's formulate a good hypothesis or a good thesis around answering this question of how we can actually really use HRV in a practical manner with some of the coaches and the athletes at High Performance Sport New Zealand, in some of the Olympic athletes there.
And when you say, Dan, it was interesting, probably fairly self-evident for a very astute endurance athlete like yourself. But then you say results were positive. What do you mean by that? They were impressive, or?
Yeah. So in this first paper there's one of these early papers in this HRV guided training. It split into two groups. It was an interventional study where they had one group would just do your basic training. It was a very traditional program set by a coach, which was here's your training program, follow the training program, and the other group. It did basically, measure your HRV in the morning. If your HRV is high, you can do high intensity training. If your HRV is low, you can do low intensity training. And we'll get into the details of what's high and what's good and what's bad. But long story short, the group that did high variability guided training had bigger improvements in the VO2 max, bigger improvements in fitness, and they did less training. So, and now a number of studies have actually shown this. It's been repeated a lot of times. There's been a meta-analysis done in HRV guided training as well, which is kind of the gold standard of the scientific vigor, if you like. And, and it has been shown that many times now it is a very effective way to get maximize training adaptation and get a lot of bang from your buck in the terms of training and the sorts of training that you're doing.
Which there's probably no coach, no athlete, endurance athlete on the planet that wouldn't have their ears pricked up by that, right?
Yeah, I think so. As coaches, it's this never-ending question that's always being asked is like, when you have an athlete, when should you do more? When should you do less? And if you can answer that question effectively with the correct tools, that's a really important thing to know. And, having the ability to know if you're adapting positively or negative to a given training or type of training it's almost like the holy grail of exercise prescription, right? That's really what we're trying to achieve. And I'm not saying that HRV is the holy grail. I don't think it is at all, but I think it's one tool in your toolbox that you can use to go towards answering those questions. And that's what we've always sought after with any monitoring, whether it's subjective tools or whatever it might be. They're all aimed around this kind of aim to try and know when you should do more, when you should do less.
And I guess that's reflected, Dan, in Endure IQ. Obviously, your online training platform and courses where heart rate variability is just one module in the athlete monitoring course, right? This is, as you say, just one tool in the toolbox.
Exactly. So, within that course, athlete monitoring, we have, it's very large. We have like a module that's specifically designed for swimming because we talk about, tempo trainers, critical swim speed, ways to monitor swimming, accelerometry, cycling, cycling with power, differences with using power and heart rate, running with power, HRV, blood markers, just basic heart rate markers, submax heart rate recovery, resting heart rate. There's 10 modules in that course all up, and HRV actually takes up 2 modules of that course because I feel it's quite a large area and there's a lot of the background in the physiology needs to be understood, and there's also a lot of ways to measure it, as we'll get into. So, it's just one area that you can use to inform your decisions. And I always think that with any type of monitoring, and I always said this to many of the coaches who I worked with when I was at High Performance Sport New Zealand, working with rowing coaches, kayak coaches. It's like monitoring isn't there to make decisions for you. It's to help inform the certainty of the decisions that you're already making. It's to help coaches have better certainty over their own decisions, because 9 times out of 10 they might be, this athlete, should I give them more load? Do they need a rest? And you can help inform those decisions with some good data, but you don't necessarily make those decisions for them. And I think that's an important segregation.
So if you missed episode 318, heart rate variability, guided endurance training, jump back with a pen and paper for plenty of learn-ins. Now, coming in as the 9th most downloaded episode for 2022 was featured performer, Ineos Grenadier, pro cyclist and Ironman triathlon champion, Cam Wurf. Now, in episode 310, Cam shared his career, highs, lows and learn-ins, and boy oh boy has there been plenty of those. And in this next clip, you'll enjoy hearing the back end of Cam's rapid-fire performance round, where he shares his hardest training session that he can recall and his top tip to help you perform at your physical best.
Oh, man, honestly, I love training. I love exercise. I love getting out and going training every single day. I guess I hate days off. Yeah, I hate the off season.
There's your answer. Training session. Flipping that, training session most loved.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a good the adventures. The things that stand out for me are like the adventures that, particularly like Richie Port and I, we did 400k one day on his birthday. Froomey and I, we rode all through, Tambourine and up to the border and back, and we finished at is it Binnaburra, and did and we got off and we actually ran up in the forest there, did like a 21k loop one day, swam at the waterfalls during that, and another time we rode from Chatel to back to Monaco, so in the Alps back to Monaco. But the first night we just rode and finished on top of the Galibier. It was like 250k, and I remember doing the first 200k on the TT bike and Froomey being just in bits, and then we had to go up the Galibier, and I was way better shape than him, and I'll never forget that. And but yeah, I think those, and then Richie Port and I doing the Madone, but yeah, I think those adventure days, the days that are obviously it's a crazy training session, but it doesn't feel like that because it's an adventure, and it's something I wrote down a bunch of things in my book. I know this isn't rapid fire, but I wrote down a bunch of notes in my book on the flight over, and one of the things that I wrote down for this year is embrace the adventures more, and not going on the old cuckoo side of loving the experience and all of that stuff, but just not being afraid to go out there and do something a bit crazy, training session wise, not being too protected. That's the thing I learned with Froomey particularly, they don't wrap him up in cotton wool. It's they definitely, I remember one day we rode to Byron Bay. We went via Nimbin. We actually met Tim Reed in Nimbin. That was quite an eye-opener. But got there, went for a swim with the sharks, and just those sort of things for me are the things that I can't wait to get out of bed for in the morning when I know we've got something like that on.
Anyone that's passionate about their training can resonate with those adventure days. That's brilliant, Cam.
Yeah.
Pre-race meal, have you dialed in what you ingest before you take to a stage of a Grand Tour or an Ironman, or what's the go there, Cam?
No, I seem to have something different. I'm very territorial with the way I eat. I guess when I'm in the US, I seem to have an oatmeal. They're big on their they call it oatmeal. We call it porridge, but in Australia, I grew up on banana and sugar, or banana and honey on toast. So I remember having that before Port Quarry. In Italy, I remember, I went down for breakfast and all they had was pasta and rice. So, okay, pasta. I had rice with a bit of milk and honey. And in Copenhagen, I think I had carrot cake for breakfast because I couldn't really find anything else I really wanted. So, I haven't really dialed it in, just sort of what's there, what I feel for. I mean, the reality is the meals in the day, the couple of days before are the most important, particularly 2 days, probably 2 days before, the dinner 2 days out, lunch, dinner that night, are probably the most important. To fuel the tank in the morning, it's just placebo, make yourself feel good. And, I don't stress too much about that. Just make sure I'm happy and at least mentally think that I've got a full tank, and that's the most important thing. Worry about the rest once you get on the course.
That was Cam Worth, episode 310, Ineos Grenadier Pro Cyclist and Ironman Triathlon Champion. Now, coming in as the 8th most downloaded episode for 2022 was Megan Keichman on episode 327, registered dietitian and sports nutrition researcher with an expert edition on disordered eating in sport. Now, it's been estimated that the prevalence of disordered eating and eating disorders in athletes can range from 0 to 20% in males and 6 to 45% in females. Disordered eating, in simple terms, is an eating behaviour that is not optimised, and it may range from what is commonly perceived as normal dieting through to full diagnosed eating disorders. And here's Megan outlining known risk factors for disordered eating.
There's many different risk factors. One of the ones that's talked about the most, or being the highest risk factor for eating disorder development, is actually dieting. So somebody deciding to go on a diet for well-intentioned means, maybe it's to improve health or improve performance, and this can easily just spiral into an eating disorder. So somebody starting on a diet can be a really big risk factor for disordered eating development. But then there can be some other things like personality traits. And this could be why athletes in general are at higher risk. So things like perfectionism can put somebody at a higher risk. There's genetic factors. So eating disorders has a large genetic component to it. It could be things like change in somebody's life. So often eating disorders can be precipitated when somebody goes through a big life change, like maybe they move to a new city, or they're starting off at university and moving away from the first time, or even just big changes in life, like the COVID-19 pandemic. What research is showing is that eating disorder rates just skyrocketed during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it was a way to deal with some of the mental health concerns that came with the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah, there's a lot of different risk factors that can put somebody at risk. And another one I should mention as well is an athlete getting injured. So an athlete all of a sudden not being able to participate in sport anymore, and then really trying to manage their injury through the food that they're eating.
Gosh, I'm pleased you mentioned that. Certainly as a sports physiotherapist, that's something I come across routinely, and that is changes in fueling or eating behaviours around people's injuries, whether it's a bone stress injury and that big reduction in energy output that the athlete fears will result in weight gain, yet the body needs fuel to heal. And so there's often that shortfall, which brings about a set of challenges in and of itself. Mm-hmm. Talking about risk factors, anything else that sort of pops up? I know there's this idea of body dissatisfaction and body image, which I've read in the AIS guidelines for disordered eating can be split into an athletic body image and also a social body image, which I find really fascinating. That, of course, it makes sense that there can be two body images that an athlete has of themselves. Can you speak to that in terms of your clinical and research experience?
Yeah, it's a really interesting component, because oftentimes the body image that is associated with performance enhancement in sport isn't always the ideal body image in society. So for instance, maybe for a female athlete, being larger and more muscular and taller is performance enhancing. But then within cultural, it tends to be the more skinny or thin female. And we tend to see the opposite with guys and sports, where maybe being slimmer is performance enhancing. But outside in society, there can be a different ideal body image, and they can tend to go against each other. And this in itself can cause body dissatisfaction. And like you said, poor body image and body dissatisfaction can also be a risk factor for eating disorder development.
Yeah, gosh, I'm the father of three young, beautiful girls, and they're all one's a toddler, or not even a toddler, sorry, an infant, but they're very different girls. That's genetics. And in speaking with athletes and hearing their beliefs about their body image and the self-awareness, it can be really confronting. We've featured athletes on this program, on the featured performer episodes, where they have had all sorts of encounters with the public, coaches, sponsors, through their athletic journey around the apparent or seeming mismatch between their body shape and the typical performance attributes of performers in their sport. And it's It's really challenging and confronting.
Yeah. And that's a good point that I didn't raise either. For these elite athletes, people are always commenting on their body, and often they're having to perform in clothing that is really revealing of their body. If we think of what some of the female runners go on and perform on, and commentators and the public feel free to make comments on their body, which is wrong and can be really harmful for them when they go and they hear these comments.
So if you missed episode 327, jump back with a pen and paper. There are so many learnings to be had from Megan's share-ins. Now, coming in as the 7th most downloaded episode for 2022 was episode 348, featuring Great British triathlete, 2013 World Triathlon Series champion, and 2022 European Triathlon champion, Non Stanford. Non shared around her career's highs, lows and learnings, and she issued some wonderful advice regarding how to deal with disappointment and how to maximise the team around you to perform at your physical best. It was such a wonderful featured performer episode, and we certainly wish Non Stanford all the best with her new coaching career after her retirement from triathlon earlier this year.
What would be your top tip to athletes on how to best deal with disappointment? Obviously, it's a big question and it's always contextualised to the situation, but what would be your advice? You've just taken on some coaching reins there. A young athlete's disappointed. What would Non Stanford say to that athlete?
I think you have to focus on what you can do, not what you can't do. I think it's really easy to be sort of consumed by, I can't run. I can't go out and do my run day. And I think you kind of have to let that go and focus on what you're actually able to do at that point. If the series is really serious and you actually can't do much activity at all, then you focus on spending time with friends and family, or focusing more energy into your studies if you're studying, or work, or some other avenue where you can sort of focus your energy and not be all consumed by the fact that you're not doing the sport that you ultimately love and enjoy doing. But if you can exercise, you focus on the rehab that you have to do and sort of how that's going to get you to your end goal of getting back on your feet. And I think it's just taking each day as it comes, and not looking too far ahead and putting sort of pressure on when you need to be back racing or back training by. And that's kind of what I've learned over the years, is to take each day as it comes and focus on what you can do and not what you can't.
Powerful and wise words. You mentioned rehabilitating injuries there, Non, and you also mentioned several of your more significant injuries across your career. What did you learn, or what would you reflect on now, coming to the near close on your career, around maximising the team around you, whether that's the medical team or any team, the coaching team? Like, what would be Non Stanford's top tips to get the most out of the team around you?
I think communication. So communicate with your coach primarily, and if you're fortunate enough to have a good medical team around you, be honest with them and upfront with them and communicate, because ultimately all those people want the best for you and are there to help you. And I think I'm really fortunate that I've come through a system where athletes, staff and coaches all communicate well together. And a lot of the times when I've got injured is because I haven't probably shared how I'm actually feeling with my team around me. I think it's natural, especially in endurance sport, for athletes to endure for far longer than they should, with pain or discomfort. And I often think by the time an athlete gets to a coach or a practitioner and says, I've got this pain, it's probably, a bit further down the line than it should be. So I would always encourage people, as soon as they start feeling a niggle, to, even if you just document it, in Training Peaks or whatever platform you use, and if it's documented over more than a few days, then that's when you start to think, okay, actually this is serious, or, worth looking at. So it's just all about communication and being honest with yourself as well. I'm very good at denying or not being honest with myself about how much pain I'm in, or how much something's affecting me. So I think that would have to be, my top tip, really.
Now, coming in as the 6th most downloaded episode of the Physical Performance Show for 2022, we have Dr. Jessica Orchard, episode 347, sports cardiology and cardiac screening researcher, the associate editor of British Journal of Sports Medicine, who shared some so important learnings around cardiac health for the endurance athlete. We all know of someone in the sporting endurance community that has had to battle with cardiac ailments, and Jess's concise and knowledgeable approach was welcomed into the ears of all of our listeners for this episode. And here's Jess sharing her top 3 tips for endurance athletes to maintain cardiac health.
Tip number 1, don't stop exercising. So even if you've got a stress fracture or an injury that means perhaps you can't run for 2 months, it's really important to keep your heart health up through something like cross-training, swimming, cycling. You might still lose some running fitness for your leg muscles, but your cardiac will be maintained. And one of my colleagues, Andre Lagersh, often says, your heart can't tell what shoes you're wearing, but it can feel the effects, which is a great line, I think. He's a pretty handy athlete himself, having run a sub 2.5-hour marathon. So tip number 2, if you've got a symptom that's worrying you, get it checked. So just because you're very fit doesn't mean you can't have a problem. So if you've got an arrhythmia, fainting, bad family history, crushing chest pain, feeling of a sudden loss of a cylinder, anything like that, go get it checked. Third tip, continue to test for COVID if you've got symptoms. Certainly it's getting to be less of an issue now that isolation isn't required, but it really is important to know for your maximum performance, you still need to know if you've got COVID and rest up if you've got symptoms. There's a really great Return to Sport article that's just been published this year in the Journal of Science and Medicine in Sport, led by Dr. David Hughes at the Australian Institute of Sport, together with a great team of co-authors, and it provides a really good graduated return to sport post-COVID. And also in general terms, stay home when sick. There's a lot of reasons to think that respiratory illness can actually contribute to poor cardiovascular outcomes. You're probably not going to gain a huge amount by training when you're sick. So back it off for a couple of days if you are.
And that's a question that so often gets thrown up. Should the athlete continue to exercise when they've got symptoms? How much is okay? How much is not? And there's varying, I guess, guidelines thrown out there, but I guess there's no hard and fast rule, but it's trying to be wise. And maybe you're on the side of being conservative.
Yeah, definitely. And also ask yourself, is it super important? If you're just going for a sort of a light training run, do you need to keep going if it's really making you feel unwell? How important is it? Are you playing in a grand final or you're just doing run number 5 of the week? I think that's part of the question as well. And if you are in an event or something, are you going to be able to do your best? Sometimes you just have to be patient with yourself and say, I just don't think I can do it today. The same way you might say it if you've got a hamstring strain. There's a level you can push through and a level you probably can't or shouldn't.
So there's a level you can push through and a level you probably can't or probably shouldn't. And just to recap those 3 top tips, because they were wonderful, don't stop exercising, even if you're injured. Find a way to keep some cardiac activity. Get any symptoms checked and continue to test and monitor for COVID if you have symptoms. Obviously so pertinent in the post-COVID world. It was such an important expert edition. If you happen to miss episode 347 this year, be sure to jump back with your pen and paper and enjoy the learn-ins. Coming in as the 5th most downloaded episode of the Physical Performance Show for 2022, we have Purple Patch fitness founder and head coach Matt Dixon, who featured on episode 332 in a Coach's Corner episode where Matt shared some wonderful tips around how to self-regulate the intensity of our sessions and workouts. It was such a popular episode 332, featuring Matt Dixon. If you missed it, you know what to do.
Matt, you mentioned something that has emerged several times in recent episodes of the Physical Performance Show, and that's this idea of self-management, self-regulation of the athlete. Recently, Paul Lawson shared around the context of evolving artificial intelligence in progressively in coaching. It's just not replacing the coach, but just another tool in the toolbox. And Paul said that one of his principles is he wants the athlete to feel the session, not just blindly follow the prescription. What would Matt Dixon, what would you add to that to help the athlete be empowered? That's your word, the empowerment, around feeling the session, self-regulating the session, and not just following that high-intensity interval session that is on the program that day. What are the tips that the athletes need to know to be confident to do that?
It's a great question. I think it's really, really important because if we use running with GPS pace monitors, heart rate monitors, we use bicycles with power meters, etc. That those are really useful tools in the toolbox. But if you take a session, and maybe the best example is to take a small example of a training session. The first thing that the athlete should do, and this flows from our prior little discussion, is understand, what am I trying to get out of this workout? So what's the intent of it, and what does proper execution look like? That's good. And then, because with that understanding, they should have a little sense of what should this feel like? What's too hard? What's too easy? So on one end of the scale, if you're building something quite foundational, a bit more base building, it should be conversational. It should be soul-filling. It shouldn't be, really suppressing the system. On the other side of the high-intensity intervals, are you prescribing this to me, or am I planning this session where it should take me to failure? Probably not. Or should it be an 8 out of 10 effort around? And what should be the expected outcome based on my performance variables and current training? And it might be around here. So one of the things that I'm not a fan of is prescribing specifically by a number. Go and do it. Very occasionally we do it in extreme, but in the most times, so I think there are many structured workouts that pre-program someone's rides and hold them to a fixed intensity. The problem is, and that's often based off a number that was derived from some assessment many weeks ago, maybe, on a single day, to say, this is the specific number. You're going to hold 200 watts for 6 minutes. And that's madness, because physiology is not building a bridge. It's not. It's chaotic. It's influenced, as we talked about, by lots of different stressors. And some days you might feel better than other days. Sometimes you might have accumulation of fatigue from life or prior training. So if you understand the intent, you understand what it should feel like, then you can go and execute it. And then what you have while you're executing is what I call the inner animal, what it should feel like, self-regulation. And then you have your heads-up display. And you have your pace or your power, if it's biking, running, or combination of both. And that's a measure of your output, so the work that you're doing, and that's the output. And then you have your heart rate, potentially, even lactate, if people are drawing that at, razor thin edge of performance. And that's a measure of your internal cost. It's the way to think about it. So those aren't the drivers. They're the framework, they're the regulators, and they're the conversation starters. Oh, that might be a bit too much. Or is that actually appropriate for today? And it's through lesson. And I think that precision is a word I don't like. In like 200 watts, if it's 190, it's a bad day. If it's 210, you've gone too much, making it up. But that's just madness to me, because we just don't need to go there. So I begin to sum it up, to make it more intent, what the exertion should be like, then measuring so that you can review afterwards and have a heads-up display of external output, which is power or pace typically, and then internal cost via typically heart rate. And if you go in that order, that creates a nice framework for athletes to actually become aware. And it also diffuses that pass-fail mentality. Today was a good day because I did 210. Today was a failure because I only did 190. That's not the case. Actually, that 190 watts under fatigue or something might be a really good, valuable training day. And so it tries to limit the pass-fail mentality of a training session.
Now, coming in as the 4th most downloaded episode of the Physical Performance Show for 2022, we had our much-loved Expert Edition repeat guest, none other than Dr. Stephen Seiler, who in 2022 captured our attention and our earbuds as he outlined this concept of intensifying or extensifying with regards to the notion of durability. And here's Dr. Seiler outlining why increasing or building our durability needs to start with training frequency.
When you say the term durability, the physiotherapist in me thinks about durability of tissues, the ability to be robust physiologically, physically, show up week in, week out for training sessions, as you've shared and taught us so well in the past. It's not the 10 training sessions, and it's definitely not the epic one session that makes champions. It's that ability to show up season after season, hopefully uninterrupted by injury. That is we talk about it a lot in the physical therapy space, but it's still an out there, often intangible concept. We know it when we see it, the robust athlete. We know it when we see it, the athlete that tends to run into a sequelae of injury.
And I want to be careful here, because it might be that someone will listen to me and say, I guess I need to get out there and do these epic 7-hour workouts to build my durability. And I'm going to say to you, whoa, slow down. Let's go there. You may eventually get there. 7 hours may be part of your equation, but I would rather say to you, let's first focus on just being able to do lots of workouts and stay healthy. Just as you're saying, so that the first measure of robustness is going to be just tolerating a pretty high frequency of training. So let's start with frequency. Can you train every day and feel decent and recover between each workout? Are you managing that? Are you managing your intensity and your duration? And that's part of coming back to this 80-20 business is trying to find a sustainable pattern of extensive and intensive workouts and managing that, and then increasing frequency. That's kind of step one. For the age grouper, they're going from 3 workouts a week to 4 to 5, and sustaining it and staying healthy. And then once we've gotten up to a certain frequency that's starting to feel pretty good, 5, maybe even 6 days a week that they can sustain and work and stay healthy, then we say, okay, let's see what happens now. Can we lengthen some of those workouts without dropping the frequency? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It starts with frequency and staying healthy, and then start to extend.
Yeah, and then you say, okay, now I'm gonna extensify. I'm gonna extensify, and then and then small increments in intensity. But that's kind of the third. That's the last thing we use is little increments in intensity. But a lot of times what the inclination will be is that's the first thing we go to in our adaptation work box or toolbox, is we say, I'm going to go harder now. I'm going to do more intervals. I'm going to push the intervals harder. And so I would say, let's flip that around. Let's get frequency up. Then let's get comfortable with longer duration. Then let's start adding in more intensity. And it's not from Stephen Seiler that invented this. It's what we see good athletes doing. And then we can understand why, but it's developing from the athletes that through trial and error of figuring these things out.
As always, it was an absolute wonderful expert edition from Dr. Stephen Seiler, episode 317, and it was followed up by an equally popular Q&A session taken from Dr. Seiler's live stream in 2022, which was featured on episode 325. Now, both of those episodes have so many learnings embedded in them. If you missed it, you know what to do. And if you want a recap or refresher, jump back and take a re-listen. Now, we are into the podium places, if you like, for 2022's most downloaded episodes of the Physical Performance Show. And coming in the bronze medal, third place position, we have none other than 8 times world triathlon champion Javier Gomez from episode 315, who shared his career highs, lows, and many learnings across one of endurance sports' most enduring and remarkable of careers. And here's the tail end of Javi's physical performance round rapid fire questions, where Javi outlines his best recovery tip before sharing his top piece of advice for us to perform at our physical best, which, heads up, has to do with the power of consistency. Enjoy this snippet from episode 315, featured performer Javier Gomez. Best recovery tip, Javi?
A good meal is the most important, I think.
Fueling.
Some good food and fueling straight away after the training, and I really like to ice my legs as well. The cold water, I feel that helps me a lot as well.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Javi, one word to describe your racing style.
Oh, one word: efficient.
I think many would agree. Javi, how would you describe being in the zone?
Being in the zone is, for me, being totally focused on what I'm doing, regardless what's happening outside. And sometimes I can achieve that and do it in a race, and sometimes not. Sometimes I see what's happening around. I can see the crowd or these people or the other one, and other times I don't remember even if there were people cheering or not. I'm just completely focused on what I'm doing, and so for me that's being in the zone, when I'm only listening to my body, my rivals, and totally in the moment, not caring at all what's happening around me.
Powerful. I think one of my favourite finishes in triathlon ever was your and Johnny Brownlee's epic sprint finish, which is a bit of a YouTube sensation for epic triathlon finishes. And, Alistair stops on the other side of the road, cheers for Johnny to get there, and you get Johnny on the line. I think, was that 2014 or 15 in London?
I think that was 2013, the grand final. And that was one of those moments of being in the zone in the way that, I was racing in London. The crowd was so loud, obviously cheering for Johnny, and we were racing for the world title. Then I watched the video and I saw Alistair, cheering Johnny, but I didn't even remember that. I don't recall of that happening. But I was completely focused on choosing the right time to make my move. I was understanding and noticing that we had a bit of headwind, so it was going to feel long, that sprint. So I wanted to stay behind him as much as possible and try to encourage him to start the sprint a bit too early, which I tried to do a couple of times, and I think he started sprinting too early. And from that moment on, the strategy was simple: just try to stay behind him and off the win, and just passing the last few, on the blue carpet if you can, the last 100 meters, and that's what I did. I had that extra push in the end, and he was struggling that last 100 meters. But I was completely focused on what I was doing, not on the noise around, which was huge.
Yeah, it was huge. Jump over, check that finish out on YouTube. It's amazing. And last question, Javi, in the performance round, we know that epic sessions don't make champions, certainly not 2 decades of high performance. But can you recall a standout hard session that you've completed over the years, one that was particularly grueling?
I did some crazy stuff in the pool. I did once 8x200s holding 202, 203 on leaving time on 230. Oh. When I was a better swimmer than now. That was a short course. That was a good one. And running the classic 8x1K around average 242 pace, something like that. Starting a bit slower and finishing a bit faster. And I've done great sessions on tired legs, and I think I was probably not the fastest runner ever, but when I was in my best times in ITU, I could run quite quick off the bike, pretty close to my best running ability. So that was a good thing for triathlon.
Yeah, that fatigue resistance. Javi, well done. You're out of the performance round. And 2 final questions. Javi, every guest of the show gets issued with it gets asked to issue, listeners with a physical challenge for the week. So what is Javier Gomez's physical challenge going to be to listeners? You can go hard on us or you can go easy on us. What's it going to be?
Yeah, times in terms of training, I don't know. Try to do a good track session. I don't know, something like 6x1K at the best average. Best pace average. That one hurts. But try to pace. You have to be able to do the last one as fast as the first one.
Stay consistent. All right, Javier Gomez's 6x1K track challenge with consistent pacing across the intervals. And Javi, if you could boil everything you've learned, and you're still learning, like you said at the top of this recording, you're learning now about long course, all the nuances there. But if you could boil everything into one piece of advice to help listeners perform at their physical best, what would Javier Gomez's single piece of advice be?
It might be a topic, but it's consistency. I mean, especially, I think professionally we are more consistent, but sometimes I see with amateurs or age groupers that they do a great session one day and then they are tired the next day, they are not motivated, they might not train. And sometimes it's better, you don't have to break your records every day. Just do the job, do the training. If you have a bad day, I understand that it's fine to go a couple of seconds slower, but it's much better doing it than not doing it, unless you feel too tired or you're sick or something. But, that consistency day in, day out, that's the most important, more than breaking records in every session or every now and then.
Now, coming in as the second most downloaded episode of the Physical Performance Show for 2022, in the silver medal position, we have the 2021 World Ironman Triathlon Championship silver medalist, none other than Great Britain's Kat Matthews. Now, those that follow the sport of long course triathlon certainly know that 2022 started with such a high for Kat. However, just before the 2022 World Ironman Triathlon Championships held in Kona, Kat was involved in a motor vehicle accident whilst riding her bike, which resulted in Kat not being able to take to the start line. This was such a popular featured performer episode. It's easy to see why. Kat Matthews truly is one of the shining lights in the world of endurance sports. And here's Kat sharing around how she balances stress and the expectations around performance.
How do you now move forwards with all eyes looking at you, expecting high performance from you going into the World Championships in 4 or 5 months' time? How do you balance that stress and the expectation?
I think it's different every time you do a race. I think it's about your own, I used that word just a minute ago, but stability. I think it's about that mental stability and trusting in where you're at. So I knew before St. George that I should be in, before I did Lanzarote 70.3, I had a great race. I knew that was spot on where I should be performance wise. And if I can replicate that in St. George, then I could win. I just took that as a fact. You sort of know as well, that's Annie Haug. She's coached by Dan Lorang. He knows what shape other people are in. Laura Phillip race. You start to create this database of, okay, who's where and what's going on. And I just used that for St. George. There was a lot of pressure. I was, talked about as the favourite, and I was like, just wait. You can't rule Daniela out. You can't rule out that Anne's, come round. You can't. So I don't necessarily worry about other people's expectations as long as I'm happy with where I'm at. It's slightly different with sub 8. And then going forward to Hawaii, I think I'll use the same idea. I'll use this. I guess it's a confidence mentality of, what do I need to do to be happy on the start line that I can have the swim I can do? And that is train consistently for X many months. That's 20 kilometers a week for the next 4 months. Done. Tick. That's all I need to do. And actually, that's something I worked on at the beginning of this season with a sports psychologist, was this, I guess it's confidence profiling, understanding where I get the confidence from. So I'm in the race, I'm running sub 8. I know that I'm at 170 heart rate, and I know that that's a physiologically happy place for me. And if I just keep running at that, then that's done. So then when I'm training, I know that I need to have sustained efforts at and around 170, 175. And then I'll be happy to run that in a race. It's just this real rational breakdown of coping with my own expectations and trying not to necessarily let other people's expectations and pressure filter into my own world.
Gosh, it's powerful. You said, you asked the question, what do I need to do to be happy on the start line? And I've also heard you share, Kat, that you have to be mentally sound to be physically well. So I guess this is a strong link. You need to be psychologically in a good space, happy, enjoying it, well prepared, and pull the trigger and release, right?
Yeah. And I think that comes a lot from the physio background as well. I went straight into my first, proper job was in the army. It was at Headley Court, which is a big rehabilitation centre for complex injuries. Some post-Afghanistan and some just rehab that wasn't getting any better. And I learned very quickly that our physical experiences are linked to psychology. They're the same in a way. And so I think I've always brought that into my own training, that if you're not ready to be there, then what's the point you're not going to be able to perform because you have to be there mentally first. And I experienced that really heavily and negatively in Challenge Daytona in 2020. I'd worked so hard during lockdown to have this idea. My dad had said to me, the person who's winning at the end of 2020 is going to be the person who's dealt with COVID the best. And I was like, right, that's a good challenge. I'm going to be the person who's coped with COVID the best. Psychologically, bear in mind, I hadn't had COVID. And so I had a really great performance at Ironman Florida in November, which emotionally was similar to, it was like complete emptying of the tank. And then I wasn't prepared to race in Daytona, and I didn't want to race. I was like, a week before the race, I was actually stopped a training session and rang my husband. I was like crying. I was like, I can't do this. I don't want to be here. And he was like, well, you're there anyway. What's the point? Just race, give it a go. And I wasn't healthy. I wasn't physically fit, and I wasn't mentally fit. And all of those together then meant that I actually DNF'd, and it's the first and hopefully the only ever time I'll do it. But that just reaffirmed this idea of, like, psychologically, for me, it's different for some people, I'm sure, but I have to be 100% emotionally ready to hurt. Otherwise, I can't perform at my best.
Gosh, you have to be 100% emotionally ready to hurt. Otherwise, you cannot perform at your best. I think most people could recognize and can understand that. It's you have to be ready to hurt. It's pain, right? It's enduring pain and going to very uncomfortable places.
Yeah,
scary.
And you train that. It's not just, I don't enjoy I'm not one of these people who like loves to suffer and loves the pain, but I think I get a lot of learning from doing that in training sessions, like knowing that this rep is really hurting, and if you finish this rep, then it means that you can finish the race. And I always have those like big sort of, just finish this rep, and that will mean that when you're hurting in the race, you can finish. It's just this constant, I guess, visualization in a way to performing in a race. And so every single rep that you do that really hurt, that's, I don't know, the last 5K of the marathon.
Which is when you need it.
Congratulations, Kat Matthews, the second most downloaded episode of the Physical Performance Show for 2022. Now, drum roll. Coming in the gold medal position for the most downloaded episode of the Physical Performance Show for 2022, we have none other than Dr. Dan Plews, who on episode 352 lit up the internet as he shared around this concept and lifestyle of a low carbohydrate diet, right fuel, right time approach. Now, this episode was so heavily shared amongst the endurance sporting community, and it's easy to see why, as Dr. Dan outlined the benefits of such an approach for long-distance triathlon and endurance events, outlined the scientific whys and hows, and debunked many of the myths and mistaken beliefs around this approach, including one of my own, throughout this expert edition. And here's a snippet from 2022's most downloaded expert edition, episode 352, low carbohydrate diet, right fuel, right time approach.
In this paper that we published, we showed that one of the greatest drivers of fat oxidation during exercise is habitual diet. So that means having a lower carb diet and having more fat in your diet is really important. And exercise duration is also really important, as I mentioned, and also muscle glycogen. So generally, the lower our muscle glycogen at the start of exercise, the better our fat oxidation. But doesn't mean to say that we want to start a race with low levels of muscle glycogen. Of course not. But there might be specific times, if you're not on a low carbohydrate diet generally, that you might want to reduce muscle glycogen a little bit before you do a longer session. So one of the things that I often do with my pros is that the ones who aren't on a lower carbohydrate diet will look at, say, they've got a big ride on a Wednesday, a long, low intensity ride, and I'm thinking, okay, this is one of the outcomes of this ride is that we want to promote our substrate use, we want to promote fat oxidation. We'll train the Tuesday night. That night, we'll purposely refrain from replenishing carbohydrates. So it'll just be proteins and fats for dinner. Obviously, lots of calories still. In the morning, again, we'll just have like protein and fats for before the ride, and then during the ride, you refrain from carbohydrates until you can kind of tolerate it. So 2.5 to 3 hours, then you might take some in at that point, depending on the individual. As you know, when I rode, I didn't take anything on. I just had a in the morning. I had a coffee at an S Fuels bar. which is no carbohydrates, and then I didn't take on one carb.
No, it was, and I hadn't ridden 4 hours since May, so 6 months prior. And I was a little bit nervous, so I was looking to just take anything I could. But and I was watching you. You had one bidden for the whole 4 hours as well.
Yeah.
And I was like, right, okay, you've got my attention. And not only did we do the 4 hour ride, you then got off and ran a 1 hour hard, relatively, intense run with about 400 or 500 meters of elevation, and I couldn't even keep up with you on the mountain bike. So
I think that's one thing that we should talk about, because when it comes to racing, I don't race this way. And that's why the devil is in the detail. And Endure IQ, we wrote a course, LDT 101. We now had more than 1,000 people through that course. It's one of our most popular courses, and we've had so much success. Like the success stories of people changing their lives, changing the way that they race, because the course is something that I'm quite proud of. And, because when it comes to racing, of course, you do a bit of a carbo load before, make sure your liver glycogen's topped up, and you also take carbohydrates during as well. It's not like you're limiting your carbohydrates all the way through and then eating avocados and MCT oil during the race, because I never say that carbohydrates are the enemy. In fact, I'm saying the opposite, really, because I'm promoting the preservation of carbohydrate during racing. And that's what you can do. It's always two sides to the coin. You can either improve your fat oxidation, or you can increase your carbohydrate intake during racing. What I promote and what I think is the best and the safest way particularly for age groupers, is go moderate on the carbohydrates during racing and improve your fat oxidation.
So I assume that improving your carbohydrate intake, this is where there seems to be a race on how many grams of carbohydrates athletes can now ingest per hour, and there's certain numbers being thrown out, and various athletes and camps that sort of coaching outfits that talk about, pretty huge numbers, the professional cycling peloton, greater than 100 grams an hour, etc., with the view that you can train your gut to be able to tolerate that high level of carbohydrate ingestion while you're exercising. What's your view on that? I've heard you state in person when we've had a conversation that there's a very real ceiling, and many people don't necessarily need to go anywhere near those numbers, particularly age group athletes.
It's a great it's a great statement, and one of the things you said there is you can increase your ability to tolerate the carbohydrates, and that's true for sure. So you can train your gut, you can train yourself to tolerate more carbohydrates when you exercise. But what you're not doing is you're not improving your ability to oxidize the carbohydrates. So that means that even though you're tolerating them and you're taking them in, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going anywhere. They're pretty much just sitting in the gut, and you're tolerating them sat in the gut. They're not actually really improving performance, so to speak. I mean, of course, there are a few freaks out there, the very, very elites, who might be able to oxidize more. But generally, most people can only tolerate about 90 grams per hour if it's in a mixture of fructose and glucose. But the problem is many people are intolerant to fructose. So this is where the GI distress. And one of the things that I noticed personally, and you'll probably feel the same, is I think there's three major pinch points for any Ironman athlete, particularly age group Ironman athletes. Number one is when I'm stood on the sideline of an Ironman triathlon, many people just have the bonking, they run out of energy, which we've already talked about. Number two is there is so much GI distress, people stomach problems on the side of the street, bent over, going to the medical tent because they just can't, they're just taking in too much carbohydrates, or they have that general GI distress, which still to this day is the number one reason for DNF during ultra distance triathlon. And number three is that, like, body composition. Most athletes struggle to maintain a normal body composition or a stable body composition all year round. And many of them, despite training 20 hours a week, still look like a normal person who doesn't do any exercise. And it's because of the effects of the carbohydrate on the insulin, on the fatty, and the storage of fat, and the amount of carbohydrates in the diet. And I think being more mindful and going for a lower carbohydrate approach, not a ketogenic approach, can actually mitigate and solve all those three major problems for many, many athletes.
So there you have it, the final episode of the Physical Performance Show for 2022. Congratulations to our podium place getters and, of course, our entire top 10 most downloaded episodes, and, of course, all of our guests for 2022. As you can attest, they have all been brilliant and generous in their sharings. This show would not be possible without their generosity. Thank you to you, our faithful and loyal listener, for your support as well. Now, don't forget, you can go into the draw to win a stunning Polar Ignite 3 fitness and wellness watch worth 499 Australian dollars by jumping over to the show notes over at Physical Performance Show for this episode, episode 354. Sign up to Polar's newsletter, follow Physical Performance Show on Instagram, and follow Polar Australia AUS on Instagram ahead of New Year's Eve for 2022, and we'll draw a winner shortly after that and notify the lucky individual. So a massive thanks to Polar for their generosity and their support throughout the 2022 calendar year. As always, a huge thank you to the team behind the show: Daryl Misson, audio engineering; Susan Wilkin, show administration; Matthew Walding, show graphic design; and Milan Borrow, show videography. Big thank you to our show patrons. Your practical support helps enormously in the production of this show, so thank you. If you'd like to become a patron of the Physical Performance Show, you can do so from just $5 per month, and in return we'll grant you complimentary access to our entire back catalogue of live stream events and all upcoming live stream events, including a very hot live stream coming your way from 2021's most downloaded episode, and that was Olav Alexander Boo, Norwegian sports scientist and coach for Christian Blumenfeld and Gustav Eden, who in the first quarter of 2023 will be conducting a live stream for the Physical Performance Show listenership. So stay tuned for more details around that live stream event. So have a very Merry Christmas and safe holiday period. We'll be back in 2023 for some more highs, lows and learn-ins. We'll be taking a summer break and see you back on the airwaves soon. Until then, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer and this has been the award-winning Physical Performance Show.